Warm welcome to everybody attending this evening's Pension Committee and also those watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Stuart Mathers and I'll be chairing this meeting. Details of the meeting we'll consider today is shown on the agenda and copies are accessible online underneath the live broadcast. At the end of the public part of the meeting, the committee will move to discuss any confidential matters. The live broadcast on YouTube will then be cut. Any members of the public present in the room will be asked to leave. A few housekeeping measures. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if there's any fire alarm goes off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to designated meeting points. Also, a polite reminder to switch off any mobile devices, put them to silence before we continue with the meeting. Online housekeeping, some important online housekeeping bits. Please ensure any mobile phones around you are on silent. Please keep your microphones muted when not speaking, and only one person may speak at a time, as I, Chairman, will call those to speak. Finally, a reminder to anyone speaking today that your voice will also be audible online as your microphone is switched on. So the first item is apologies for absence.
We have no apologies from members, Chair.
Are there any declarations of interest in matters before this meeting? No. So on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any points anyone wants to raise? No. Are we happy to agree those? Agreed. Okay, so just to confirm that the items marked in Part 1 will be considered in public and those in Part 2 will be private. And our first item in Part 1 is the administration report. James.
Here we have again the regular reporting from Hampshire, which again shows 100% performance against the KPIs and a continued increase in the member portal sign-up. We've just had the November figures and it shows almost 40% sign-up now across all of the three categories. In the report also I'd like to highlight the pensions regulated data scores which have just been issued, which show 90% for common data and 90% for conditional data, which is a slight improvement on last year. Further information will be in the November report and I will distribute that to committee and board members separately. Some of the files including lost contacts where we've done address tracing, but there are some people we still can't track down, sort of historic members, etc. And also we have some care pay, so career average revalued earnings pay, which needs updating, although we've made a big improvement on that. So we've basically halved the number of issues from the previous year. And we've got the guaranteed minimum pension update, which still needs to be rectified. So that's causing a big sort of deduction in the data quality. But next year we'll be sort of looking to sort of remedy that. The other main item in the paper relates to the annual return benchmarking exercise, which highlighted a number of performance issues with employers. Performance was recorded last year, but as this was the first year we were with Hampshire, then we didn't actually go back to the employers with the results because they were just getting used to the system. This year, however, we have written to senior staff at all employers to highlight the results and the issues. Unfortunately, performance of employers was not very good, so we will be working directly with the employers to improve the process for next year. I'll hand back now to committee so they may ask Andy or myself any questions.
And is there anything you'd like to add before we go to questions?
Thank you, Chair. The only other update I'd give would be on the benefit statements. So again, a bit of further work during November. So the active benefit statements are now at 99.34%. So it just moves on a little bit from the report in front of you.
Thank you. I'll go to questions from the committee. No? I just wondered if you could explain a little bit more around the cyber security. I know that's been an ongoing concern and the penetration tests are clearly working, and just how the pipeline's going and what the future steps are with that to ensure that all vulnerabilities are resolved.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So just had a further penetration report or penetration test, I should say, undertaken in November. We've used a separate company this time, a company called Infotech. We're they've just issued their report to our IT department, who are working through it. Some vulnerabilities identified, low levels in terms of number, so we're quite pleased with the overall kind of output, and I think we're starting to get to the point where we're seeing the results of that regular external penetration testing, working with both our IT and the software supplier to do fixes, and then rerunning penetration tests. So we're seeing those low numbers kind of giving a kind of steady state now. What we'll do is we'll work with IT and Civica on the vulnerabilities that are identified. We'll share those with James once we've got the final output from the last report. One or two highs is my understanding, one of which is already in progress for a fix, and one will be picked up in a later release, but nothing too untoward at this stage to report back to the committee, other than that ongoing vigilance and good work, really.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? No? Okay. With that, can I move the recommendations 1, 2 and 3 on page 7? Are those agreed? Agreed. Thank you. And thank you very much, Andy, for your attendance.
Thank you.
Item number 6 is the internal audit report, the effectiveness, can't even say the word, apologies, of our pensions committee. Can I ask those from internal audit, is it Jack or Claire?
Hi Chair, I'll be presenting today. So if everyone be so kind to turn to page 27 of your report packs, you'll find a final report for the effectiveness of pensions committee. The report was based on the fieldwork internal audit undertook between August and September this year. Overall, we provided the positive assurance opinion of reasonable for this assurance engagement, which is consistent with our expectations, and as James mentioned on page 25, is one rating down from substantial, the highest rating you can achieve in an audit. Our findings consisted of 2 medium and 1 low, with the findings reflecting gaps in controls in the following areas: training and self-assessment. We identified that there are sufficient provisions in place for training. However, at the time of testing, we identified gaps in completion of training. We note that this is part due to a new member onboarding onto the pensions committee. Additionally, we identified that at the time of testing there were no self-assessments in place, but again, James mentioned that this is something that is being developed and will be implemented in due course. For an internal audit developed survey, we identified gaps in member knowledge pertaining to technical terminology, which we've highlighted in the report. As you'll see in the report, we have provided a number of recommendations to be considered, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? No? Okay. Roger, yes? By all means. Thank you, Roger. I mean, so there are 2 medium findings, that's correct. And with each of them, there are 3 recommendations. I think the useful ones that should be quite a quick win are the ones around jargon and the way in which we can spend a bit more time understanding, but also communicating clearly on that one. And the one that intrigued me, there is another one I will talk about in a moment, but the one that intrigued me was around the self-assessment, and I wondered what, within that recommendation, how that might look, what that might look like, if anybody has any thoughts. I know that that's predominantly going to be for councillors as a tool to self-identify areas they can improve. It's not necessarily a kind of do this in or out, pass or fail, but it does provide a useful tool that would mean that we know exactly what's needed. Are there many parallels with the pensions board's kind of self-assessment or training protocol? Are they similar, or is it bespoke to each board or committee?
There are a lot of similarities, but there are some differences because of the 2 different roles that they play. So the board with their sort of governance oversight of the committee and officers and the committee as a decision-making body. So there are some differences, but of course in terms of regulations, in terms of understanding investments, etc., and those sort of things, they're all similar in administration, regulations, all of that are the same. So there are a lot of similarities with some differences. And sort of later on in the committee reporting, we are looking at a tool that's been produced by Hymans Robertson that will actually go into everything, the knowledge and skills based on CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accounting, or Accountancy, sorry, their modules and what committee and board should know. So the assessment tool is sort of set up to sort of gauge members' knowledge and board members' knowledge as well in those areas, and then sort of highlight what we need to then focus on.
Councillor Bells?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, it's good to look at your effectiveness as a committee, and I'll go along with it. And it is a learning process. There's a lot to take on for a lay member of a committee that's not, not in the pensions business, so to speak. And I think these recommendations can only help. So yeah, let's go along with it.
I do think, for context, so this is effectively a brand new committee this term, and for me, we had one experienced member who stayed on for part of the start of this term, political term, I should say, that gave us a bit of context from one committee to the other. There's always going to be a vulnerability for pensions committees when there's electoral changes that mean there may need some upskilling, but I think to have so many members who were new to pensions committee was a particular challenge, and the support we've had from officers and our advisors and others has been fantastic, and we're now on a pathway where we're testing knowledge in order to make sure we're all as competent as needed in order to do this. I think there is, for me, a challenge around confidence rather than competence, where we clearly don't have, as the report shows, enough contributions around items, and that is inhibiting us demonstrating what we know and what concerns us or what doesn't concern us. It may also have the potential risk of not helping to examine some decisions made, particularly investment decisions and others around policy. There may not be enough challenge for officers and others from the committee. The recommendation on page 31, which is for the finding number 3, suggests that there could be consideration of onboarding an experienced independent member to the Conventions Committee to raise collective knowledge. I've had quite a lot of thought about this myself. I think because at the moment the challenge is contribution and demonstrating knowledge, having an experienced or an expert who is kind of non-voting member of the committee, I'm not sure will at the moment enable us to increase the contributions. My worry would be then it might just be the chair and that person exchanging conversation rather than encouraging those others to join in. So my suggestion to the committee would be that we pause this for a moment on this recommendation, but accept all the rest. Wait until the next committee in the new year, give ourselves a couple of committee meetings to grow in confidence, to support one another, to contribute more, for some to catch up on the training as newer members. And then if we find that once we're doing that, we're not demonstrating the competence that we need, then that would be a better time to have the experienced contributor in as part of that. I mean, we do have advisors, an independent advisor and others. We have a number of experts around the room, so but it's our challenge towards them that needs that tailoring. So I'm going to suggest to the committee that we accept the recommendations, but with that recommendation we pause it for a while. It's due to be implemented in June, but we wait a little longer, and this is our opportunity as a committee to grow in confidence, to add more contribution and challenge into the reports. And before I put that on, Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the first committee I've been able to get to because of the timing. I don't criticise it at all. I know it's got to be where it is, but those of us with full-time jobs which take us all over the country, it's a bit of a difficult one. But having said that, one of the risks identified is preparation time for the committee meeting. And just looking at this bundle and going through it, if I was assessing this for the day job, I would pitch this at around 20 hours worth of work in terms of reading and absorption. And we get it, and again, this is not a criticism, I know the pattern, but it was published on the 5th of December, so essentially, if we stuck to a working week, it would be roughly a working week. And to have that volume of complexity against a background of different expertise around the table, certainly as far as members are concerned, some of which is transferable in one sense to this, in different ways, it is a very, very big ask. And if I'm right, and there's a bit of a formula that we use in terms of reading and absorption for important documents. So 20 hours worth of work for a bundle like this is quite a lot. So if there is a way of getting the paperwork to us a bit earlier, especially if there are decisions and important decisions to be made, or if there's some form of timeline for decision making, to have that in mind when the documentation is served on us. I think just following on from what you've just said, in terms of confidence and in terms of knowledge and skill, that all comes as an assisted way once you've got through all of this. You're using your knowledge and confidence and skill in order to be able to absorb what's going on and to just physically read it. So I think an appreciation of that against the background that most of us on the member side aren't skilled and lifelong and steeped in pensions people, it is something to be thought about perhaps, and if there is a way of getting the paperwork to us a bit earlier, then that would be very useful.
That's extremely helpful. I think that's something we can maybe look at between James and Democratic Services. Is there a way of, if not all of the agenda beforehand, members seeing parts of the agenda that need a bit more consideration or a bit more time to read through and get through? If we can make a note of that, that would be really helpful. Unless there are any other contributions. Oh, Claire, sorry.
The comment I was going to make was around the exact same point and the recommendation that you referred to, Councillor Mathers. Independent professional committee members for local government pension schemes or pensions committee equivalent around the country are not common at all. I'm not aware of any that are attached to councils, that administrative authority councils that do have that. It is more common for employers or member representatives to be on the committee. So I agree with your thought process about pausing and reflecting and thinking about this rather than just adopting this recommendation straight away. But on the other recommendations, I think you'll see later when we talk about the training policy, I think that new training policy and implementation of that will address a lot of the other recommendations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Are there any other contributions? Yes, Councillor Banerjee.
Thank you, Chairman. So, excuse me, I'm just dealing with a bit of a cold at the moment. In the sort of, my day job, the projects I work on, sometimes we have like a glossary of terms, and I don't know how difficult or how easy it would be to build something like that, and that would be like an ongoing asset that future committees could use as well. And just to, even if it's like providing links online or to other resources, that may just help to sort of like build the knowledge and confidence in the committee and have just a reference point for us. So that's where I sometimes struggle. And like I said, using experience in other areas, maybe we can look at doing something like that. So that's a suggestion for me. Thank you, Chairman.
James?
Yeah, I'm glad Councillor Banerjee mentions that, because it's actually something that Claire Tunde and myself were working on. Was almost like a handbook, but not maybe 5 pages with real headline information, and something we were discussing beforehand as well, just sort of what fund managers are doing what, etc. So that's something we're looking to prepare. So hopefully that will be ready before the next committee. that's something we were thinking of. So.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. If there are no other contributions, are we happy to accept the recommendations with the pause on 2.3? Is that agreed?
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I just thank yourselves from Internal Audit for the time you've taken on this and the insight you've given. It is much appreciated. Thank you. Please pass that on to others. Our next item is item 7, the Investment Strategy and Fund Manager Part 1. Tunde, I believe you're going to be presenting this.
Thank you, Chair. The main headlines from this report are the investment returns over the quarter, and overall the fund returned minus 0.55 in comparison to the benchmark, which was flat 0. So it's like a 0.5% underperformance comparison to the benchmark. Over long terms, that is 3 to 5 years, we were 3.53% behind the benchmark over 3 years, and 2.50% behind the benchmark over 5 years, which were sort of a regression compared to the previous quarter's report. In terms of contributions by managers, the private equity and Macquarie portfolios were the best performing managers, whereas the main detractors were the LC Global Alpha Paris Aligned portfolio and LGI property funds. The fund dropped about £11 million in value over the quarter. So, and as at today, the unaudited value of the fund was just about £200,000, which is 1.182 billion in comparison to the quarter figures. So, in terms of the asset allocation, which we'll be discussing part 2, we are still about 2.4% underweight in multi-asset credit and 3.6% underweight in index-linked gilts. Overall, the global equities is now slightly about 3% overweight. So that's it.
Okay, if I can ask for any contributions or questions. I know we are discussing probably this matter a little bit more in part 2. I think that the main point for myself is, I mean, the funds that did well are the ones we're exiting, as it were, which is just the nature of things. I was particularly interested to get a little bit more context on the marketing and investment economic outlook. So China's economic situation seems to be on my news feed regularly. Now, whether they're just targeting me because they know I'm here, but I don't think that is the case. It would be useful to get some context, maybe from Izio or others, around the impact that's having on our funds specifically. And I also wondered if I could just get a little bit more context around the bonds market and the impact that's having, and what that might have with the new allocation, as it were.
Sorry, technology nearly defeated me there. So, yeah, so in terms of those two things, both big factors in terms of what that's driving within markets. I'll start with the latter one first. So, if I take you back over the last year or so, inflation's been going up a lot. So post the war in Ukraine, post the economy's reopening, post COVID, we've seen significant inflation coming through the system. In response to that, central banks have been raising interest rates, so effectively to try and get inflation back under control. And that shift in inflation and shift in interest rates is effectively important for all investment markets, all asset classes, and that's been driving some of what we've seen. Now, in terms of where we are on interest rates and inflation, certainly we've seen this in the UK, but inflation's come back down. So the action taken effectively to push up interest rates is having an impact on inflation. That's starting to come back down. There's also effectively just an effect that sort of inflation's gone up, and some of the larger increases that have already come through are now falling back out the numbers, so that's part of it as well. In the last few weeks, we've seen a significant fall in long-dated interest rates. So up until the end of September, we'd seen interest rates going up, and the central bank rhetoric about we want to keep rates higher for longer to keep inflation under control. And that was posing some challenges. So if you look at your assets, higher interest rates in the UK has meant that UK bonds have sold off, they've come down in value, and also UK properties been challenged by that. So higher interest rates puts more pressure on property capital values. So that interest rate effect has been significant. In the last few weeks, we've seen long-dated interest rates come down, and that's helped to lift equity markets back up. So effectively, as interest rates come down, generally lots of asset markets are going up. As interest rates go up, sort of asset markets come down. So that I guess there's still quite a lot of volatility there in terms of the market trying to interpret where are interest rates going to go, how quickly is inflation going to come down. In terms of China, so China's got some real issues in its property sector, so there's huge amounts of lending to Chinese property. Chinese property was going up and up in value. That cycle has turned. So I think the commentary, I guess the LSEV's commentary, kind of indicating that China was stepping in to try and stimulate the economy to try and offset some of that. So that I guess is still a challenge, and China is a challenge for global markets, given again the scale that China's now built up. Alongside that, there's clearly a lot of a geopolitical sort of wider issues in terms of conflict in Israel, conflict in Ukraine, some of the potential conflict in China and Taiwan as well. So that to date hasn't really impacted markets, surprisingly. So equity markets have kind of continued on largely regardless of all that, but clearly there's a risk that grows, so that could have a potential impact on equity markets. In terms of your portfolio, direct exposure to China is pretty limited. It sits in small elements within some of the equity portfolios. So the LSEV Growth Fund, Baillie Gifford's had some exposure to China. There's lots of growth in China, but more recently those positions have been challenging in terms of detracting some value. So I'll maybe pause there just to see if that was helpful, if there's any questions.
Councillor Mathers, do you want to contribute?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, isn't this what we see in this report affected in a sense by the sort of ups and downs of global issues? And in other spheres, the message is don't panic just yet, because there are ups and downs of very significant effects, and things metaphorically and literally blow up around the world at different times, which have knock-on effects for markets and for investments and so forth. So is this any more than what we might anticipate from ups and downs and from market effects, rather than any one big thing to worry about? And do we anticipate a kind of levelling out when things get a little less awful as time goes on? And we would hope there to be a degree of stability at some stage, or even things getting a bit better. So is it something that we should look at and think, well, okay, it's to be kept an eye on, but nevertheless, let's not worry massively at the moment? Is that a fair assessment or not?
Yes. So as a committee, our view would be you should be taking a long-term view. You're setting a long-term strategy, and you really don't want to be trying to call markets on a quarter-by-quarter basis based on news flow. And anybody that's ever tried that has destroyed huge amounts of value, because it's nigh on impossible to make these calls on markets. So from our perspective, in terms of our advice to you, it would be take a long-term view, certainly be cognizant of what is going on and the potential opportunities that creates, or potential risks that it creates. But in terms of the news flow, if you like, don't get overly focused on the short term news flow. Set a long term strategy and just make sure that that's evolving in the right way over time.
You need to know where you are at one point, but when you look back over a period of time, hopefully it's not too much of a hit each time. Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other thoughts? I have one, if I may. So yes, I agree with the 20-year approach rather than the focus on the short term. But I do think as a committee, one of the areas we need to look at and strengthen our understanding on is how the benchmarks have been set in the past and how we help measure the performance against that. I suppose my question, while we have our colleagues from the CIV here, is Baillie Gifford has consistently, for us, underperformed. It could very much be the timing of the markets for us. I know we joined not too long ago, but it would be useful to understand how you, as the CIV, are monitoring and working with them to mitigate some of the worst performance or even improve it over time, if I may ask so.
Absolutely, I'm happy to cover that now. If I may start with China first, just to give a little bit of color and echo some of the comments from David. So for your global alpha exposure, the portfolio you hold with Baillie Gifford, historically they had quite a bit in China. They were strong believers in that market, and that played well for them. But over the last 1.5 years, they've cut exposure significantly. They reduced exposure by 50%. So that was a big move for them, and it was a decision made on political grounds. So essentially their view is right now there is a battle in China between the Communist Party and the market, who is going to control the economy, and they just don't want to take a view, and they don't want to be at the opposite side of the Communist Party. So essentially they cut their exposure to half. They never held companies that are directly exposed to the central government. They tended to hold smaller companies in technology, but they now concentrated their exposure in those smaller names to protect themselves from that situation. So tricky situation in China in terms of the political battle that is going on there. Coming to performance, China was also part of the reason why they underperformed. The market has come down. Their exposure to some of those names hurt them. The other reason why they underperformed was stock mistakes. They held some of the companies that did really well during the lockdown period. Companies like Peloton, the producer of bikes that we can all use at homes, and this was extremely popular during lockdown, but they didn't read the post-lockdown situation very well. So holding some of those names hurt them a lot. Stock-specific mistakes that they recognized and they've cut exposure to. And the third very significant reason for their underperformance was the fact that they are a growth manager. And we will talk in a few minutes about growth and value, but essentially we are in a situation, as David was alluding to, where we see very high interest rates in the markets. Strategies that have a growth orientation, that they hold companies that the cash flows are in significant periods in the future, in 5-10 years, tend to underperform when interest rates come higher. And that's because the discount of those high earnings in the future, when you bring them in the present, is much lower if you have high interest versus low interest. So their orientation towards growth, the fact that they don't hold energy companies, hurt them quite significantly. So 3 areas that we recognized and talked with them, and they took significant steps to cut exposure to. What we've done over the last year is that we increased the frequency of interactions with the manager. We meet with them not just every quarter to discuss performance, but we do with them what we call annual due diligence exercises, where we basically travel in Edinburgh or we hold Teams video conferences, and we kick the tires, not just from a performance perspective, but also we meet with the lead portfolio managers and the research team. We spend quite significant time, and we increase the interaction, and we hold this every 6 months now. So we are happy with the steps they've taken. We give them a clear warning that performance needs to turn around. Yes, this is a growth strategy. We recognize that they would have a headwind because of that, but the stocks mistakes the stock mistakes they did with some of those names was really something that they should have been prepared to take the gains when they were up. Really bad performance, therefore, of the last 1.5 years, but that comes at the top of really good performance during the pandemic. So they were a little bit slow to consolidate their gains in the period. We will continue to monitor them very frequently. Every 6 months we do these deep dives, as we call them. We expect performance to get better. In fact, they had a really good November. They were up 7%, but that's not enough. They need to bring their overall numbers back to where they were. Since inception and longer term periods, they are about the same as the benchmark, but their target is about 2%, so they really need to carry on the good performance of months like we've seen in November in order to cover the lost ground. I hope that gives you a little bit of color, but happy to take any questions.
So we joined quite later in the game, I think, in terms of this fund. I guess my question is, how long will it take to catch up in order to start reaching the kind of returns that we would expect with them? I know we're looking over 20 years, but how long would we expect? That there is improvement very recently, which is very encouraging, but how long can we expect not just an improvement in performance, but then to try and catch up on some of the losses that were made quite soon after we joined?
That's the 1 million question, isn't it? We keep asking the same question to Baillie Gifford, and we're being asked by partner funds the same question. There's no answer to that. Nobody really knows how long it's going to take for the performance and growth to become popular again as a style. It can take a few years. We may see volatility along the way, but what we want to see from Baillie Gifford is not deviate from their strategy. What is their strategy? To go out there and find those companies, those niche technology companies, smaller companies perhaps, disruptors that can deliver those superior returns. So we want them to stick to what they do, no matter what the performance is, deliver on that front, keep selecting and picking winners, and as long as they do that, we're confident that ultimately performance will come around. When this is going to happen, don't take easy answers on that, and I'm not going to give an answer either, I'm afraid.
I do understand that. Can I just ask, in terms of their senior management and culture, I think there was some change a while ago. I just wondered if there was any comments on how that's settling in and how they're moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a generational change in Baillie Gifford. There was a generation of older partners that have done really well over 20, 30 years, and their time has come to retire. The same happened in this portfolio. The same happened in other portfolios across the board. So we had your portfolio is being run by 3 portfolio managers. The most senior departed, and a new member came in, a new younger portfolio manager called Hillingdon. She's very capable. She was very good. She was coming with strong experience from the US team. Remember, this portfolio, the Global Alpha portfolio, is a best ideas portfolio. So they look at other funds within Baillie Gifford and they select the best names. So the fact that she was coming from the US fund was a positive thing. Notwithstanding that, we use, I will cover that in a second when we do our training, we use a red, amber and green scoring mechanism for different areas. So we downgraded them in terms of resourcing, which is one of our criteria when Helen came in, because we wanted to see how she's going to settle, if she's going to work well with the other 2 more senior portfolio managers. Malcolm and Spencer are the other 2 portfolio managers. So we downgraded them when Helen joined, just to control for anything that can possibly go wrong. But since then, we've been relatively confident with her progress. She became more involved in the portfolio construction. That's what we really want to see from the portfolio team. The portfolio management team is basically there to put the stocks together, decide the weights, decide the risk. They're not there to analyze the stocks. That's for people with more junior positions within the organization. So it's evolved nicely from researching stocks into portfolio construction and risk management. So we're happy to report that we upgraded that score back to green on that basis. So that was a very big watch point for us, but we're happy to report that actually she progressed very well and the team is very cohesive.
That's really helpful insight. Very, very helpful. Thank you. I believe the presentation is part 2. Yes. So we'll hear from you a little later. Thank you for that. I suppose for those experts around the table that we have, it would be useful, maybe not now, but for the committee to understand what we should be looking for within this report in order to assess the performance of Baillie Gifford. The context is extremely helpful, but kind of what numbers we might need to be looking at. I'm not asking for that unanswerable question to be answered, but kind of what kind of indications we might be looking at, if that's possible. It'd be great to get that information, around before the next committee meeting. Are there any other questions or contributions? No? Okay. Are we happy to note the report? Is that agreed? Great. We are now on to item 8, responsible investment update.
Thanks, Chair. Here we have the normal update in terms of voting from LSIV and LGIM, so London Collective Investment Vehicle and Legal and General Investment Management. Also, we've included some highlights of some of the activity of Legal and General, Local Authority Pension Fund Forum, our lobbying partner, and also, again, LSIV. And all these activities contributing towards a positive ESG result. I should also highlight to committee that we will need to start looking at the stewardship code again, so we will be in contact with committee members to ascertain the best way forward and things we need to amend in terms of our submission. But with that, I'll just pass back for any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? No? So we are about halfway through from the year from when we scored people on their ESG, went through that exercise. We've got another 6 months for them people to come back and evidence how they did against that scorecard. Okay, that's really helpful. Yes, Councillor Bells?
It was interesting. I noticed a little while ago Baillie Gifford were targeted by Just Stop Oil or one of the environmental protest groups at some of their awards they were sponsoring, and it might be a telltale sign.
Yeah, maybe picking up on that. So Baillie Gifford they'd sponsored a book, I think it was a book festival or something, and some protesters turned up and campaigned. Effectively, from our perspective, Baillie Gifford do a good job on ESG in terms of how they integrate that into the investment process. We flagged there are areas for Baillie Gifford to improve on, but I think in practice Baillie Gifford were quite surprised that they were targeted, given as Yanis mentioned, they don't hold many oil stocks in their global equity portfolio, so actually relative to other asset managers they're probably kind of less exposed to some of the things I think the protesters were protesting about. So I think it came as a bit of a surprise.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, are we happy to note those aspects of the report? That's agreed. Brilliant. We'll move on to item number 9, which is the risk register. James.
Attached to the report is the risk register, which has been reviewed by Councillor Mathers and officers, and shows no changes from the previous quarter. So not much to report really. I'll hand back to the committee to discuss the ratings and make any comments on those ratings.
Do we have any comments or suggestions of the ratings not being correct? Everybody's going through the tiny font. I mean, in essence, the environment we are in and the things that we have in place haven't changed significantly in the last 3 months. We're doing work on our governance, and we've got strong support from Claire to do that. So I'm confident that in those areas there will be progress made throughout. But in terms of the actual risks themselves, are we happy to agree with the register?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So talking of governance, we will now move on to the very sizable item of number 10.
Here we have the regular update on the committee work plan, and also the training, which has not changed since last quarter. So we haven't actually done any training events since the last quarter, so there's no change in the training record. However, aligned to this is aligned to the internal audit report and the requirement for self-assessment, we can develop a bespoke training plan. Here we ask committee to approve the use of the Hyman's assessment tool, which is designed to highlight knowledge gaps. Also in this paper we have a number of policy updates. We've updated the scheme pays policy and the governance policy, which have had a general refresh. Not really much has changed in the scheme pays, but the governance policy, we've updated the terms of reference for the committee, the board, and also updated the CIV structure as well. But in general, it's just a general update in that area. The training policy has been updated to reflect the governance review that Claire undertook earlier on in the year, and also incorporate the internal audit comments. Again, with a key focus on the changes being relating to member training. And lastly, we've got the administration strategy, and the changes in this mainly reflect the updates required following the annual return benchmarking exercise I mentioned earlier on. We want to reinforce the message that if employers do not meet their obligations and the fund incurs additional resourcing costs in terms of chasing them up and spending lots and lots of time with the employers, and we incur additional costs because of it, we will consider charging the employers. So at this stage we ask committee to agree the strategy for employer consultation. So we will send the strategy to all the employers so they have a chance to look at what we're proposing, and then we can feed back at the next committee. So for that, I'll pass back for any questions.
Can I suggest that we work through these report or recommendation by recommendation, just for so that we can get through them quite usefully. So the first one is to note the dates of the committee meetings. We'll ask that we have a conversation between officers around the timing of the meeting to see if there is a way to make it slightly later that may assist members. I know that may not assist others, but we'll have an open conversation about that. And if we could, moving on to the suggestion for future agenda items, working practice, is there anything that anyone would like to add? Happy to go with officer recommendations, thank you. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay. Committee training update is to be noted. Are we happy to note that? There are no updates. And then, so it's moving on to the schemes pay policy. James, would you just mind explaining each policy in summary as we go through, just for clarity? That would be.
Scheme pays policy is a policy that sets out what's in regulations in terms of the scheme paying people's tax burden in advance, and then that getting deducted from their pension later on. It's probably the easiest way. So basically this sets out there are certain limits. If you exceed your pension annual allowance or lifetime allowance, you can ask the scheme, the pension fund, to pay their tax bill in that year, and then when you retire, X amount comes off your pension for the duration of your pension. So that's sort of set in legislation, and this policy just sets out, it's just a refresh sort of saying people are allowed to do this, and sometimes it's mandatory, sometimes it can be a choice. So that's the scheme pays policy, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that was a good explanation, James. Fair play. Can I just ask those experts and officers in the room that they're happy that this complies with everything legally that it should do? I know that is a given when it comes in, but it would be good to just get that assurance. Obviously, we're not going to know the legislation to the letter. Claire, any comments on that?
Are you particularly looking at the scheme pays policy?
Yes, we're going one by one, just for clarity.
Okay. Well, I must admit the tax side is not my level of expertise, but I think James has been liaising with Hampshire, and I think that's what really matters in terms of the administration side and the scheme pays and tax. So So apologies, I can't give that assurance because it's not my area of expertise.
It's useful to know. Andy, are you happy?
Yeah, if it's helpful, I can confirm that, you know, we've taken the due diligence on the scheme pays policy, and obviously we talked to Hampshire about any pending prospective changes, so that's all incorporated, but that's part of the reason why we review these policies anyway, because these things do change. But yeah, they're up to date, I can confirm that.
Thank you. With that, are we happy to agree with the policy? Thank you. So we'll move on to the governance policy.
I mean, I guess this just sets out the governance arrangements for the committee. So again, it's sort of who reports to who, the duties of each body, terms of reference for the committee, what they're supposed to do, terms of reference for the pension board, what they're supposed to do, etc. Again, our key partner, the London Collective Investment and Vehicle, we've included that, and their sort of governance structure, what they do in terms of their decision making. So it's just the sort of rules around the decision making for the fund, really.
I think that, I mean, the mark changes are really helpful. The main ones, apart from the subgroup, was kind of an update of London Civ interactions with us, etc., and what their role is. And that's likely to have evolved over time because this was reviewed last in, was it 2015? About 3 years ago. So the Civ is definitely in a slightly different place than it was, encouragingly, and it continues to grow in that way. So that's really important. There was nothing that I had any particular concerns about. Was there anything from anyone else on the committee? Happy to agree? That's agreed. Okay, so then moving on to the administration strategy.
The again, it's a set of rules really that how we should behave as an administering authority of the pension fund, and also what we expect from the employers of the pension fund as well, because the pension fund is sort of only as effective and efficient as the employers giving them the information. So the employers need to give them pay information, starters, leavers, change of hours, etc., and all those sort of things. So it's all the rules around what we expect the employers to do in terms of their duties, and also what the fund is supposed to do in terms of its duties regarding administration. So it's sort of set down there, so they, you know, people have an inquiry, they should get an answer within X days, for example. So it's all the rules around the sort of performance of the fund as an administrator.
Thank you. And I suppose that from my perspective, that there's been, we have a administrator in Hampshire who have done a significant amount of work to work on, or continuing to work on, backdated data that isn't known. Their performance benchmarks are showing that they're delivering what we need for those receiving their pensions, but also those who are putting into their pensions, and the employer. That is let down when employers aren't able to provide the quality data that's needed. And I do think that there was a new standard set recently, and I know there was a little bit of maybe kickback or frustration from employers, which I think it is reasonable that there's that the fund listens, but that new tone is always going to be a bit awkward when you're asking people to improve their data quality. So it's really important for me that we do have an approach that is carrot and stick with employers, but at least this gives the teeth a little bit for the fund to, I don't want to say apply the stick, that's not very helpful, but it does give the balance that's needed. And the pension fund has a finite amount of resource that it tries to use as much as possible, so it's value for money. And I think that it is important that where help is needed for employers, it's offered, but equally where that's excessive because someone is not fulfilling their duty, that is charged back. So I would agree with that, but I do want the employers to know that it is a carrot and stick approach and not just a punitive one. Are there any other comments or thoughts on that? Roger.
At the last board meeting that we had that you attended, we had a considerable discussion about this, and I would, and Pensions Board is thoroughly in support of the changes that have been made and the comments you've just made, that it's important that the scheme protects itself, because some of the smaller employers haven't been really pulling their weight, and that did expose the authority or the scheme to risks, and these changes, we think, are what's required. So this very much meets what Pensions Board asked the scheme to do.
Thank you for that confirmation. Are there any other comments? No? I'd just like to thank officers for their continued work on this and just encourage employers to respond to the consultation as much as anything. Otherwise, these things will just happen without a voice, which would be deeply demoralising. Okay, with that, are we happy to approve? Thank you. And we're moving on to the training policy.
Again, this is the policy that sets out the training required for the committee, officers, etc., and what's expected. Claire was quite instrumental in developing this, so maybe we could ask Claire to sort of have input on the training policy.
Thank you, Claire.
We reviewed the policy. The key parts of the policy remain intact, but we really strengthened the policy in a number of areas. Particularly, we were looking at the new pensions regulator code. Although it's not yet been finalised, we were looking at that and trying to adopt as many areas as possible. And I think also this policy does address the points made by internal audit as well. So just to touch on some of the detail, the policy applies to all parts of the governance, including committee members, board members, and officers. We've developed the framework on page 138 of your pack, which includes a knowledge assessment to regularly assess. It's not a test. It's just to really assess where training is needed going forward, and we'll be able to assess the effectiveness of training that's already been delivered as well. And importantly, we can customise training plans as a result of that, because different members will need different things. We've strengthened the induction area, and the regulator is quite clear about members being up to speed within 6 months of joining, and also, as referred to earlier, James mentioned the handbook, partly for the induction, but it's also going to be a reference document for all. We think this will be a good development, and including a glossary as requested earlier. We'd already thought of that, so that's good that we're on the same page. On an ongoing basis, we've developed the framework on page 142 of the pack, including both internal sessions, external sessions, and reading as well. Trying to develop a plan which is flexible but meets the current needs of the committee, both looking at the knowledge assessment, but also thinking about what's on the agenda, what are the current issues being faced by the fund. So that's the sort of high-level summary. Once agreed, if agreed, there will be more monitoring and more of a proactive approach from the officers. And what we'll plan to do is use that framework in the appendix and to bring forward a plan for 24-25 for the main internal sessions and give some thought to suitable external sessions once we've had the knowledge assessment back, if that is agreed. I think that's another recommendation on the paper.
Yes, I believe that recommendation is that now or part 2? Okay. Do you want to give us a little bit more information on that?
Claire's been talking with Hymans Robertson in terms of an self-assessment tool. So, maybe Claire, but basically it's a tool you go in and it assesses your knowledge. I'm not sure if it asks questions for you, but maybe I could pass over to Claire. I think she's been talking to Hymans directly in terms of the self-assessment tool, but basically it will ask you questions and then try and work out where your gaps are in your knowledge, and then from that we get an output which says, okay, we need to focus on X, Y, and Z.
Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. The tool is used in a fairly wide range of funds across the UK. I think the questions are fairly high level, based broadly around the same topics that the Aon modules that most of you have already completed. Really high level to assess, where members are. What will happen is you'll get your individual results back, and then we'll also collectively get a set for the whole committee, which is anonymised as well. So you'll understand your own personal results, and we'll get the level of committee in terms of knowledge and gaps in certain sections, and we can use that to then put in place sessions. Either it be for all committee if there's a gap, which is common across most members, or look at individual training needs for individual members and customised training plans like that. I'm seeing this as a much better way of targeting training plans rather than just a more general assessment of where do you think you need training. I think it's much better to know what the knowledge level is, and we can also think, well, we've already done training in this area. If we haven't been sharing that knowledge and gaining that knowledge, then we have to look about, maybe we didn't do it properly.
Thank you, Claire. That is a key tool for myself. I think the knowledge assessment to not be trying to guess, but actually have something that gives us a quantitative measure. And we spoke earlier in our internal audit around trying to demonstrate competence, confidence, and elements of knowledge and skills as part of that. So this tool will do that, and it does it in a way that doesn't seem too not intrusive, but I don't know what the quite word is, but it seems to be a way that's reasonable and fair. But there obviously is then a duty on committee members to ensure that we use it and that we follow up on the areas where the skills or knowledge don't quite match. Are we happy to approve that knowledge assessment tool? Yeah, and the training policies. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to double check, it's a cost of £3,500 for 10 users. That's an annual charge, so it's not over 2 or 3 years.
That's an annual charge, I believe. Yes, but if we only use it once, we may only need to use it once to get the initial assessment, and then if we get new members on board, etc.
And just to follow up, then, but it doesn't provide any training. This highlights the gaps. Then they have to pay additional for the training.
There is also another module that Hyman's provide, which then you pay an additional fee on top of that to access their training portal. Whether we choose to use that or whether we choose to do our own training, we can decide once we get the output from the self-assessment.
So you're happy with the initial assessment tool and then potentially looking at other things later on in terms of that package. Is that agreed? And do we approve the training policy? Agreed? Okay. So with that, we thank you all for your help and work on that. We're now moving on to item 11, which is the Pension Fund Annual Report and External Audit Plan.
Attached to this report is the Pension Fund Annual Report for Pension Committee comment and approval. This is presented every year in a format set down by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, and is currently being audited by our external auditors, EY. If there are any amendments, however, we can change the report and advise EY. But basically it's a set report that just demonstrates the fund's activities for the whole year, including the statement of accounts. Also, I'd like to advise committee that in November 2023, the Pension Fund Audit Plan was presented to Audit Committee, as that's the committee charged with governance in terms of audit. The plan is now brought to Pensions Committee for information. In essence, there's little change from the previous year other than an added risk regarding the fair value level classification. So that's just how we classify certain investments in the accounts. I can explain that if the committee want me to. The actual audit in this area started in October and is progressing well. To date, they haven't reported any issues, and we should get the outcome in Q1 2024. But with that, I'll hand back for any questions.
Just looking at the annual report, it demonstrates our commitment to the Stewardship Code and ESG. We've made significant progress there, and also our commitment to pooling. And I think When we were going through the pooling consultation recently, our commitment to pooling with LSIV was noted, and our approach is very much in favour of that. It helps us both in managing funds, but also in terms of reducing costs over time. So I think that this report really clearly reflects that, and it's great they're here with us today. So I just wanted to make that note publicly, and also thank all of the officers and advisors and individuals, the board themselves as well, and committee members for their work over the last year. It is appreciated. It is a very in-depth area that we all need to be familiar with. I know there are those that do it every day and those of us that do it every other day, but I just want to thank you all for your help and support with that. With that, are there any questions on the annual report or the audit plan? Are we happy to approve and note those respectively? Okay, thank you. With that, part 1 is now concluded. We will end the feed and be moving into part 2.